Welcome to your first at-home lecture for Art 166. That is Graphic Design Fundamentals. Hopefully you are in the right place. Okay, so today we're talking about the elements of design. These are the various elements that you can use to make a design. Oh, wow, that's brilliant, isn't it? So the first three in one swoop are point, line, and plane. Now, point is a rather abstract concept, and we'll get to that in a second. But a point is one thing. You put a second point, and you connect them, they become a line. And then you connect a series of lines, and they become a plane or a shape. I will use the terms plane and shape pretty interchangeably. So a point is a conceptual element. If any of you have worked in any of the software that are vector-based, you know that points are the building block of any of the vector art. But to put a point on your screen, it doesn't really become anything until you start connecting several points together to make a shape or a line. But it is something we have to consider as an element in design, and you'll see that more in a minute or two. And because a point is an abstract concept, we use a dot. So we use geometric terminology, which is a dot, to depict the idea of a point. And I wish our first element of design was not quite so philosophical, or I guess esoteric is a better word, but just bear with me. All right, so like I said before, the point is the building block for other elements, namely a line or a shape. In life, we can imagine a point as an insignificant fleck of matter, like one of these little cracks in the wall, or something more significant like a bullet hole, a drain. Any of these things here can be seen as a point or a dot. So I think we'll stick with dot. All right, so a line is an infinite series of points. Understood geometrically, a line is a connection between 2 points, or it is the path of a moving point. Now, we can create a line with various tools. Lines can vary in their texture, their weight, their length. You just pick up a pencil, pick up a pen, and make a line. It's going to be different. Take a magic marker. It's going to be different. But they're all lines. They all connect 2 spots on the page. The concept of a line can also be captured by photographers and how they angle their cameras. For example, I think you would look at these pieces of cement here as not necessarily, well, not forget the pieces of cement, the lines that are receding, the orthogonal lines that are receding to the horizon. They're shapes, but by this angle, you really do see the lines going. And so this is going to be important for your first exercise that you're going to do. So I would say that would be an good example of some lines. It is a dominant element in that photograph. I would say this too, even though they are shapes, the limbs come down and then they make those shadows. It has a very much of a line or a linear quality about it. I'm trying to give you some examples now to make it a little more relevant and not so intellectual. We draw, especially when you're starting out, you use contour lines to explain the world around us. We draw what's around the element. But there really are not lines per se in nature. Here's another kind of implied lines. The lines on the left are actual lines. The ones on the right, those dots are not touching each other. They are not connected, but we read that as a line. And that's the case with every example there. There is an implication of a line. And that's what we'll see in nature as well. If I was to draw this tree on a piece of paper with a simple contour line, it would be a line all around the tree, around the trunk and each leaf. But when you look at it, there's no line around it at all. So we see implied lines all the time, and only sometimes do we see actual defined lines in nature. Now, as a graphic elements, lines and points are used to create texture, shapes, or planes. You can have points of varying sizes to create shades of gray. For hundreds of years, printing processes have employed dots and lines to depict light, shadow, and volume. Just by the placement of the dots on the upper right, they create a sense of the dark and light areas. But there's no value in there. There's no grays. There's no real shading. It's all done with stippling, is what it's called, with just dots. Now the next one, the third element, is a plane or a shape. And that's basically when you close the line. You can read right there, bounded planes. Shapes are planes with edges. Now a line closes to become a shape, as I just said. In vector-based software, every shape consists of a line and a fill, and this will become excruciatingly clear to you as you work in your Illustrator tutorials. If you look at this, a line can become a shape. Just make the line thicker and thicker and thicker, and then it becomes a shape. A plane is a flat surface extending in height and width. And a plane can imply dimension. If you look at that text there, there's nothing, there's a real shading going on. It's different colors, but just the angle of them, the planes, suggest a recession into space. Ceilings, walls, floors, and windows are physical planes. The plane can be solid or perforated, opaque or transparent, textured or smooth. Some more examples of images that I would look at and say, if you're going to say, is that a line? Is that a point? Is that a plane? I'd say most of those feel like planes to me. Now our fourth element, and I say fourth element for the purposes of this lecture, anyone you talk to is going to have different elements of design. I mean, there's certainly going to be 80% of them are going to be overlapped, and we're going to agree on it. But different teachers, different designers, different experts all have a different idea of what the actual elements of design. So just to give you a little perspective. So form. Form is the three-dimensional counterpoint to shape. So if you take your closed lines and you add some more closed lines, some more planes to it, you can create a sense of volume. You can see right here, these are just lines, but they do have a sense of weight. So on the left we have a shape, and on the right we have a form. Okay? So the shape is to form as a square is to a cube, basically. Form is a shape with dimension and volume added. Here's an example of an Escher work where if you start from the bottom, they're actually just simple shapes and they become forms. As they go up, they start adding dimension until they become those blocks. So you stay on the far left. It goes from just being flat to having some dimension. Now value is our next element of design, and it refers to the relationship between light and dark on the surface of an object. The value is also referred to as tone when we're talking about black and white images, so I might interchangeably use the terms value and tone. So we take a shape on the left, and by applying value, we can create an illusion of depth, and this creates the form. So now it looks 3D. We did that through using value. Value is created by a light source. You can't have any value without light. And it shines on an object, creating highlights and shadows. You can see this is a daylight image, but you can see that the light source is to the right and higher of the rhinoceros's horn because of the shadow that's going across the side of his face. So there can be more than one light source, but there's usually a dominant one. But that's why we see all those tones. And there's 256 various tones of a gray that we can have in a black and white image. Value can create depth within picture making. An object can look three-dimensional by using shadows and highlights. The relationship of one element to another in respect to light and darkness is called a value contrast. So on this leaf, the highlighted portions that we see that pop out at us are the lightest, and they play off the dark shadows that are behind it. And that's why we see it. Once again, there's no lines around this. There's not a line around that leaf saying, like you would in a cartoon. It's all a series of values, and we discern the image from that. Here's an example of the same image, but with less value contrast. We still can see everything, it just doesn't have the same pop. You can see the one on the left goes probably from a pure white to a pure black, but on the one on the right, We go probably from a 20-30% black to probably a 75% black. It's just less of a range of values. And it has a very different look. Now, landscape creates the illusion of depth by getting lighter in value as it recedes into the background. The range of values from black to white is the tonal range available to a designer. The ability to use that range effectively lets the designer determine the mood of an image and create and control the ambiance. If you go back to this, you as a designer could choose which one of these you want to use. What mood do you want? Do you have text that you need to lay on top of this image? And if you do, the one on the right is probably the way to go, because it's going to be easier to read something on top of that because it won't be as distracting. And that's something we'll get into a good deal later. So differing the range of values within a design or an illustration can alter its emotional impact. If we were in person, I would ask you how this image on the left made you feel and compare it to the one on the right. I would think you'd probably say, well, it seems more harmonious, more peaceful. There's not as much contrast. It seems inviting. And that's all because there is a low contrast in this design. And I'm talking about color contrast right now rather than tonal contrast. Tonal is when everything is black and white. Now we're dealing with some color. So the color contrast is not as great. We don't have a really dark red or a really intense yellow. These are all much more just closer in value. There's not the one thing on there. The one dark is the back of the person's head on the bike, and that's and what do you know? That's where your eye goes. The designer did that very much on purpose. They positioned that element right in the middle of the page with that dark dot on there so that your eye goes there. Now the one on the right, it still has definitely has an emotional, it tries to evoke emotional response from the viewer, but it's a little more dramatic. It's a little more, it's the Appalachian Trail. But it's got a wider range of tones. You have a very light color and you have a very dark color, and that just creates more drama. It's probably the best way I can say it. The one on the left, a lot less drama, a lot more harmonious. Now we need contrast in order to read. You go to the bottom of this, you've got black type on a white page, and that's primarily how we read. Most books are printed black on a white or almost white substrate. So the contrast between the black and the white is why it's so easy to read. Whereas if we made the type lighter, if there was less contrast between the text color and the background color, as we see in descending order from the first three, it's not as easy to read as it is if it was just. It doesn't have to be 100% black. Like the third one, that's a 50% gray. That's pretty easy to read too. But the other two are not as easy to read. And also keep in mind that you're looking at very large type right now, not the size it would be in a book. But if we printed a book with the color of the word light on the top, you would you would zone out very quickly. All right, our next element is color. We're going to get into color on its own in great detail, but this is just it's one of the more obvious elements of design, and it's one that's a lot of fun to use. Color can stand alone as a background or be applied to other elements like lines, shapes, textures, or typography. We have color in printing, we have online color, RGB, CMYK, which again means nothing to you right now, but it will. Color and combinations of colors have meaning. All colors have meaning. We will get into color symbolism a bit later. Color can create a mood within a piece and tell a story about a brand. Every color says something different, and combinations can alter that impression further. And colors become known with the brand. That orange and pink are a very large part of the Dunkin' Donuts brand. Typography is I think it might be our last element. Perhaps the single most important element. I think color is pretty far up there, but since advertising or design rather is about messaging, it's pretty important that we have text as well. Important in print and in web design. Oh, we do have one more. Texture or pattern, and pattern, they're different. Texture can create a more three-dimensional appearance on a two-dimensional surface. Like this on the left makes it look like there's a lot of dimension where that was just done through the design. It also helps build a more immersive, I think, because it's like being in a 3D world. It's just more realistic, and so we're more susceptible to believing it. But you can use texture. I think it's a really cool element. I think it's underused. It's not that hard to do in Photoshop. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty cool with layers. Patterns, a little bit different, but the same idea. And that, my friends, is your first lecture. That is on the elements of design, and make sure that you go online to Canvas and do the quiz that's connected with this. There'll be a quiz after every one of these lectures you do. If there's not, then something is wrong and it's missing. So do that. It's only 5 questions, and that is due before the next class. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next class. Goodbye.